The dress cost more than my parents' mortgage. The flowers were imported directly from Holland. The groom, he was currently texting his assistant from the men's room, arranging a private jet to Cabo with his personal trainer. I stood alone at the back of the cathedral, a heavy lace veil pinning down my dignity, listening to the restless murmurs of 300 guests. That's when he stepped out of the shadows. The older brother my fiancé pretended didn't exist. The man who owned the city. The bridal suite at St. Jude's Cathedral smelled intensely of lilies. It was a thick, suffocating scent. The kind that reminds you of funerals, not new beginnings. I sat on a velvet-tufted stool staring at myself in a floor-to-length antique mirror. I didn't look like myself. I looked like a frosted cake. The corset of my Vera Wang gown dug into my lower ribs with every shallow breath I took. The lace sleeves were beautiful, intricate, and painfully itchy. I had spent 6 months starving myself, smiling at country club dinners and pretending to care about floral arrangements, all to become the perfect accessory for Preston Rossi. Preston was safe. He was a Silicon Valley golden boy who had pivoted into venture capital. He drank spirulina smoothies, meditated on expensive retreats in Sedona, and wore cashmere sweaters draped over his shoulders. I was a cynical, burned-out graphic designer with a mountain of student debt and a father drowning in medical bills. When Preston proposed, it wasn't a romance novel. It was a life raft. I cared for him, sure, but I was marrying him because I was tired of treading water. The heavy oak door to the bridal suite creaked open. I didn't turn around immediately, assuming it was the wedding planner coming to tell me it was time to line up. "Just give me a minute, Brenda," I said, adjusting a diamond hairpin that was aggressively digging into my scalp. "It's not Brenda." I turned. It was Colin Preston's best man. He was sweating. A thick sheen of moisture coated his forehead, and his pale blue tie was yanked loose. He looked like a man who had just backed his car into a police cruiser. "Colin." I stood up the layers of tulle, rustling aggressively around my legs. "What's wrong? Did the caterers screw up the vegan appetizers again?" He swallowed hard. He couldn't meet my eyes. He looked at the floor, then at the lilies, then at the antique clock on the wall. It was 10 minutes past 3. I was supposed to be walking down the aisle right now. "He's gone, Chloe." The words hung in the air, disjointed and stupid. "Gone," I repeated. "Gone where?" "The bathroom." Colin ran a trembling hand through his gelled hair. "No. Gone. Like, left the building." He took the back exit near the rectory. A black SUV picked him up. He texted me. Colin fumbled in his pocket, pulling out his phone. He held the screen out to me like it was a live grenade. I squinted at the bright screen. "I can't do it, man. I'm suffocating. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell my mother I'll call her from Mexico." A cold, heavy rock dropped into the pit of my stomach. My ears started to ring. It wasn't the sound of heartbreak. It was the sound of absolute, unadulterated panic. 300 people were sitting out there. The mayor was in the 3rd row. My mother, who had taken out a second mortgage to pay for her half of this monstrous circus, was sitting in the front pew wearing a hat that looked like a flying saucer. The venue cost $50,000. The catering was another $30,000. I had $12 in my checking account and a maxed-out credit card. "Mexico," I whispered. My voice didn't sound like my own. It sounded thin, hollow. He took his trainer, Evan. Colin offered, unhelpfully shifting his weight. "Look, Chloe, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. He's been freaking out all morning, but I thought it was just cold feet. I didn't think he'd actually bolt." I stared at the wall. The antique clock kept ticking. Tick, tick, tick. Every second was another drop of humiliation filling the room. I was the dumped bride, the punchline, the charity case who couldn't even manage to lock down the rich guy. Tomorrow, Preston's mother would spin this to her society friends. She'd say I pressured him. She'd say I was a gold digger, and Preston, her poor, sensitive boy, had to flee for his mental health. Chloe. Colin took a step forward, reaching out a hand. "Don't touch me," I snapped. My voice was suddenly sharp, cutting through the heavy air. Colin recoiled. "What do you want me to do? Should I go out there and tell the priest? Make an announcement?" I closed my eyes. I pictured it. Colin standing at the altar tapping the microphone. The gasps. The pitying looks. My mother bursting into tears. The sheer naked shame of having to walk out of this church in a wedding dress with no husband. I couldn't do it. My lungs constricted. The corset was suddenly a vice, crushing the air out of me. I turned away from Colin, gripping the edge of a mahogany side table until my knuckles went white. I just needed to breathe. I needed to figure out how to survive the next 10 minutes. "You don't need to tell them anything, Colin." The voice didn't come from Colin. It didn't come from me. It came from the shadowed alcove near the vestry door. A man stepped into the light. He didn't wear a light blue summer suit like Colin or the rest of Preston's groomsmen. He wore black, a charcoal suit so sharply tailored it looked like a weapon. He didn't carry the soft, polished aura of Silicon Valley. He carried the quiet, suffocating stillness of a predator. Damien Rossi. Preston's older half-brother. Damien was the ghost of the Rossi family. Preston rarely spoke of him, and when he did, it was with a nervous twitch in his jaw. While Preston dealt in apps, algorithms, and venture capital, Damien dealt in concrete shipping ports and things that happened in the dark. He was the head of the family's original businesses. The businesses that built the fortune Preston now used to fund his eco-friendly tech startups. I had met Damien exactly twice. Once at an uncomfortable Thanksgiving dinner, where he said 4 words to me, and once at an engagement party, where he stood in the corner, nursing a scotch and looking like he wanted to burn the building down. Now he was standing in the bridal suite, slowly buttoning the jacket of his suit. He looked at Colin. "Get out," Damien said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Colin practically tripped over his own feet, backing toward the door. Yeah. Okay. I'll just be outside." The heavy door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone with the man the local newspapers politely referred to as a controversial businessman. I forced myself to stand up straight. I wasn't going to cower. I was already humiliated. I didn't need to be intimidated too. "Did you know?" I demanded, my voice shaking only slightly. "Did you know he was going to bolt?" Damien walked toward me. His footsteps were completely silent on the hardwood floor. He had a harsh face, strong jaw, a faint, jagged scar cutting through his left eyebrow, and dark eyes that didn't hold a shred of warmth. "Preston has been a coward since he was 6 years old," Damien said flatly. "He runs when things get real. I suspected he wouldn't go through with it. I posted 2 of my men at the back exits just in case. Then why didn't you stop him?" I flared, anger finally piercing through the numbness. Why let him leave me here looking like a fool? Damien stopped a few feet away from me. He looked me up and down, not with desire, but with a cold, calculating assessment, like he was appraising a piece of real estate. "Because a man who has to be dragged to the altar at gunpoint makes a terrible husband," Damien replied quietly. "And because his absence creates an opportunity. For both of us." I crossed my arms over my chest, a defensive gesture that was entirely ruined by the massive skirt of my dress. "An opportunity. Right. My life is ruined. My family is in debt for a wedding that isn't happening. And I have to go out there and face 300 people who are going to look at me like a dead dog in the street. Where exactly is the opportunity, Damien? He didn't blink. The opportunity is that you don't go out there and tell them the wedding is off. I stared at him. Are you insane? The groom is on a private jet to Mexico with his personal trainer. The Rossi family does not do public scandals, Damien said, his voice dropping an octave. It was a terrifying sound. My father spent 30 years building a legitimate front. I am currently under federal scrutiny for a shipping contract. The press is looking for any excuse to paint my family as chaotic, disorganized, and untrustworthy. A runaway groom at the society wedding of the year is exactly the kind of blood they want. That sounds like a you problem. I snapped, though my heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Damien tilted his head. It is a me problem, but I am offering to make it a we problem, which solves your problem. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a silver case. He didn't open it. He just held it, tracing the engraving with his thumb. I need a wife, Damien said. The words were clinical. I need stability. I need the optics of a settled, respectable family man. The feds look closer at a bachelor with a rotating door of women. They look less closely at a married man building a quiet life. My brain stopped working for a full 3 seconds. You want to marry me? You're already in the dress, he pointed out, as if noting the weather. You're out of your mind. Am I? Damien took a step closer. Now I could smell him. Espresso expensive cedarwood cologne, and something metallic. Let's be rational, Chloe. You didn't love Preston. You loved the security he provided. You loved the fact that he was going to pay off your father's medical debt. You loved that you wouldn't have to scrape by anymore. I flinched. It was true, but hearing it spoken aloud so bluntly felt like a slap. If you walk out that door alone, Damien continued, his dark eyes locking onto mine. You walk into ruin. The caterers, the florists, the venue, they will come after you for the balance. Preston will block your number. His mother will destroy your reputation. You will spend the next 10 years digging yourself out of a hole. He extended his arm towards me. Or, Damien said softly, you take my arm. We walk out there. The priest marries us. I cover every cent of this wedding. I pay off your father's house tomorrow morning. I put $2 million in a private account in your name. You get the security you wanted. I get the shield I need. 5 years. Then we quietly divorce. I looked at his outstretched arm. It felt like looking at a bear trap and contemplating putting my hand inside. They're waiting for Preston, I whispered. The guests won't care as long as the champagne is free, Damien said smoothly, and the priest will do exactly what I tell him to do. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I looked small, pathetic, a girl about to be eaten alive by a city that didn't care about her. Then I looked at Damien. He wasn't safe. He was dangerous. But right now, the most dangerous thing in my world was walking out of this room alone. I didn't believe in fairy tales. Preston had cured me of that today. I took a deep breath. The corset bit into my ribs. I reached out my lace-gloved hand, trembling just a fraction, and wrapped my fingers around Damien's forearm. The muscle beneath the expensive wool was like iron. If you ever leave me at an altar, I said, my voice, deadpan, I won't cry. I'll burn your cars. A slow, dark smile curved the corner of Damien's mouth. It was the first time I'd ever seen him smile. It didn't make him look less dangerous. Understood, mia sposa. He opened the heavy oak door. The organ music began to swell. I tightened my grip on the Mafia boss's arm, and together We walked into the light. The heavy oak doors swung open. The organist, operating on pure muscle memory, struck the opening chords of Pachelbel's canon. Normally this is the part where the congregation stands, turns, and offers a collective sigh of admiration. And they did stand. They did turn. But the sigh died in 300 throats, simultaneously replaced by a low, buzzing static of confusion. I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes fixed on the massive stained glass window behind the altar, a depiction of some saint being martyred. It felt appropriate. Damien's arm was a solid bar of iron beneath my hand. He didn't rush. He matched his stride to the cumbersome, swaying rhythm of my tulle skirt, walking with the unhurried grace of a man who owned the ground he stepped on. My father was waiting halfway down the aisle. Arthur was a good man, worn thin by decades of working middle management and a recent brutal battle with lymphoma that had drained his retirement accounts. He stood there in his rented tuxedo, his eyes darting frantically from me to the dark, imposing figure at my side. He knew exactly who Damien was. Everyone in this city did, even if they only spoke of it in whispers. We reached him. The music swelled painfully loud in the cavernous, echoing cathedral. My dad stepped forward, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for me. "Chloe, sweetie," he hissed under his breath, leaning in. "What is happening? Where is Preston?" "Preston had to leave, Dad," I whispered back, keeping my expression frozen in a pleasant bridal mask. "Damien is stepping in." My father stared at me, as if I had just spoken in tongues. He looked up at Damien. Damien didn't offer a polite society smile. He met my father's terrified gaze with calm, flat certainty. "I will take care of her, Arthur," Damien said softly. The words weren't a promise. They were a statement of fact. "And I will take care of the house. You have my word." My father's breath hitched. He understood the transaction instantly. The medical bills, the crushing mortgage, the debt that had been suffocating our family for 3 years. Preston had promised to help, eventually, vaguely, after we were settled. Damien was finalizing the wire transfer with a look. Arthur swallowed hard, tears shining in his tired eyes. He kissed my cheek, his bristles scratching my makeup. "Be careful, Chloe," he murmured. He didn't object. He couldn't afford to. He placed my hand firmly into Damien's, and we continued the march to the altar. Father Thomas was sweating. The poor man was practically vibrating as we stepped up to the marble dais. He clutched his gold-embossed Bible to his chest like a shield. He had spent months in pre-Cana counseling with Preston and me discussing communication and the spiritual foundation of marriage. Now a notorious syndicate boss was standing in the groom's spot, looking at him with eyes like black ice. "Damien," Father Thomas croaked, his voice cracking. The paperwork, the banns of marriage. They say Preston. You will cross Preston's name out and write mine," Damien instructed. His voice was smooth, carrying only to the 3 of us. "You will perform the standard ceremony. You will not ask if anyone objects. Am I clear, Father?" Father Thomas nodded rapidly, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple and into his collar. "Yes. Yes, of course." The ceremony was a blur of Latin phrases and shaking hands. I didn't hear the scripture readings. I didn't notice the intricate floral arrangements flanking the altar. I was hyper-aware only of the man standing beside me, the heat radiating off his dark suit, the steady, even rhythm of his breathing. When it came time for the rings, there was a brief, terrifying pause. Colin, who had sneaked into the front pew, looking like he might vomit, clearly didn't have the wedding bands. Damien didn't miss a beat. He reached onto his right pinky finger and slid off a heavy brushed platinum band. He took my left hand. My fingers were ice cold and trembling. His were warm, rough, with calluses that Preston's manicured hands had never possessed. He slid the heavy ring onto my third finger. It was entirely two large, cold metals swallowing my knuckle. I curled my fingers inward to keep it from slipping off. "I, Damien, take you, Chloe," he said. His voice was deep, resonating in the cavernous church. He didn't stumble over the words. He maintained absolute, unblinking eye contact. For richer, for poorer. In sickness and in health. Until death. He emphasized the last two words just enough to send a cold thrill down my spine. I repeated my vows. My voice sounded small, thin, like a child reciting lines in a school play. I was marrying a stranger. I was marrying a criminal. I was marrying a man who frightened me to my core, all to save my family from financial ruin. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Father Thomas rushed out, skipping the final blessing entirely. You may kiss the bride. My stomach bottomed out. I hadn't thought about this part. Damien turned to me. He didn't hesitate. He lifted his hands, framing my face, with surprising gentleness. His thumbs brushed my cheekbones. For a fraction of a second, I saw a flicker of something in his dark eyes. Not affection. Not lust. Just recognition. Two people doing what they had to do to survive. He leaned down, his lips pressed against mine. It wasn't a passionate, sweeping, cinematic kiss. It was firm, grounding, a seal on a contract. He smelled of scotch and danger, and for one insane moment, as the cameras flashed and the congregation erupted into a confused, nervous applause, I felt entirely perfectly safe. The getaway car was not the vintage open-top Mercedes Preston had rented for the photo op. It was a matte black armored Rolls-Royce. The doors were as thick as bank vaults. The moment the heavy door clicked shut, cutting off the noise of the paparazzi and the bewildered wedding guests, the adrenaline finally crashed. My knees gave out. I collapsed into the plush leather seat, the massive skirt of my dress ballooning up around my waist. I covered my face with my hands and let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Damien sat in the seat opposite me, completely unfazed. He reached into a hidden compartment between the seats, pulled out a crystal decanter, and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a glass. He handed it to me. "Drink," he ordered. I took the glass with shaking hands and swallowed the scotch in one gulp. It burned a fiery trail down my throat, forcing a violent cough from my lungs. But it chased away the icy numbness in my limbs. "Thank you," I rasped, handing the glass back. He didn't reply. He simply poured himself a drink and looked out the tinted window as the car glided away from the cathedral. "So," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "what happens now?" "Now we go to the reception." Damien replied, not looking at me. "We eat the overpriced chicken. We dance. We smile for the cameras. We sell the illusion that this was a sudden, sweeping change of heart rather than a desperate business transaction." No one is going to believe that. Damien turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto mine. They will believe what I tell them to believe. People are incredibly willing to ignore the truth if the lie is entertaining enough. And we are going to be very entertaining. The venue was the grand ballroom of the city's oldest, most prestigious hotel. It was a cavern of crystal chandeliers, gold leaf, and thousands of white roses. As the heavy wooden doors swung open to announce our arrival, the roar of conversation inside died instantly. The silence was deafening. Damien offered me his arm. I took it, plastering a bright, brittle smile on my face. Together we walked into the lion's den. The whispers started immediately hissing through the room like steam escaping a pipe. Eyes tracked our every movement. I felt stripped naked, judged, evaluated. The dumped bride who somehow managed to pivot to the richer, far more dangerous brother. We hadn't even made it to the head table before she intercepted us. Beatrice Rossi, Preston and Damien's mother, was a terrifying force of nature in a Chanel suit. She was a woman who wielded her social standing like a scalpel. She marched across the parquet dance floor, her heels clicking aggressively. Her face was pale with fury, her jaw locked. "Damien!" she snapped, stopping a foot away from us. She didn't even look at me. I was furniture to her. What is the meaning of this grotesque spectacle? Where is Preston? Preston decided the climate in Mexico was better suited for his nerves, Damien said mildly. His tone was polite, but his body language shifted. He stepped slightly in front of me, putting himself between his mother and his new wife. Beatrice's eyes widened. "He ran. My boy ran." She finally turned her glare on me. It was pure venom. "What did you do to him? You suffocated him with your cheap demands. I knew from the start you were nothing but a blood-sucking opportunist trying to drain my son." I flinched, the words hitting their mark. Before I could formulate a defense, Damien's voice cut through the air. It wasn't loud, but it had the sharp, deadly edge of a guillotine blade. "Be careful, mother," Damien said softly. Beatrice sneered. "Careful of what, this pathetic little... of how you speak to my wife?" Damien interrupted his voice, dropping to a terrifying quiet rumble. The ballroom around us seemed to freeze. Beatrice stared at him, her mouth slightly open in shock. "Chloe is a Rossi now." Damien continued his gaze, pinning his mother in place. "She wears my ring. She carries my name. Disrespecting her is disrespecting me. And you know exactly what happens to people who disrespect me." Beatrice swallowed hard. The color drained completely from her face. She knew her eldest son. She knew he wasn't a man who made idle threats. Preston was her golden child, but Damien was the one who controlled the family's true power, the one who kept the money flowing and the enemies at bay. "This is a mistake, Damien," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You don't even know her." "I know she has more spine than your favorite son," Damien replied coldly. "Now, you are going to go sit at the family table. You are going to smile. You are going to drink champagne, and you are going to tell everyone how thrilled you are that I have finally settled down. If you cannot do that, my men will escort you to your car." He didn't wait for her answer. He turned to me, the coldness instantly vanishing from his eyes, replaced by a smooth, unreadable mask. "Our song is playing Mia Sposa," he said softly, extending his hand. I looked toward the stage. A string quartet I had hired to play Ed Sheeran covers was now nervously playing a slow, moody jazz piece. I placed my hand in his. He pulled me onto the dance floor. He pulled me close. One hand on my waist, the other holding my hand against his chest. I could feel the heavy, steady beat of his heart. "You didn't have to do that," I murmured against his lapel as we swayed to the music. "With your mother." "I protect what belongs to me," Damien said simply. His hand tightened slightly on my waist. "And as of 30 minutes ago, Chloe, you belong to me." I woke up to the sound of absolute silence. For a few seconds, staring at a ceiling made of raw, exposed concrete, my brain struggled to reboot. My skull throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache, the hangover from 3 glasses of vintage champagne, and the sheer adrenaline crash of the day before. I sat up, the heavy silk sheets pooling around my waist. The bedroom was massive, aggressively modern, and freezing cold. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying view of the city skyline, grey and sprawling under the early morning fog. There were no personal touches, no photographs, no clutter, just sharp angles, expensive leather, and a colour palette of charcoal and slate. It wasn't Preston's eco-friendly townhouse with its bamboo floors and potted succulents. This was a fortress in the sky. Damien Rossi's penthouse. I looked down. I was wearing an oversized black t-shirt that smelled faintly of cedarwood. Vague memories flickered through my mind. The silent, tense car ride home from the reception. The awkward moment standing in his brutalist foyer, hauling the 50-pound wedding dress up the stairs. Damien leaving the shirt on the edge of the mattress before quietly closing the bedroom door, taking the guest room down the hall. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed. The polished hardwood floor was like ice against my bare feet. I found my phone on the nightstand. 12 missed calls from my mother. 4 from Preston. I deleted Preston's voicemails without listening to them, turned the phone off and walked out of the room. The penthouse was eerily quiet. I padded down the wide, shadow-drenched hallway, wrapping my arms around myself for warmth. The air smelled of dark roast coffee and something sharp like gun oil. I followed the scent to the kitchen, a sprawling space of black marble and stainless steel. Damien was already there. He was sitting at the massive island, reading a physical newspaper. He wore a crisp white dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, exposing a landscape of faded ink and scars that snaked up toward his shoulders. He didn't look like a man who had gotten married yesterday in a shotgun business deal. He looked like a man reviewing his stock portfolio. "There is coffee in the carafe," he said, without looking up from the page. "Black. If you need milk, it's in the refrigerator. Black is fine." I muttered, my voice hoarse. I found a heavy ceramic mug in the cupboard and poured myself a cup. My hands were still shaking slightly. The reality of the morning light was pressing down on me, crushing the surreal dreamscape of yesterday. I was married to a syndicate boss. I lived here now. I walked over and sat on the stool across from him, wrapping both hands around the hot mug to absorb the heat. Damien folded the newspaper with deliberate precision and set it aside. He looked at me. His eyes were sharp, missing nothing. He noted the dark circles under my eyes, the pale tint of my skin, the defensive way I hunched my shoulders. He didn't offer a polite "good morning." Instead, he slid a thick manila folder across the cold marble island toward me. "What is this?" I asked, staring at it like it might bite. "The terms," Damien replied smoothly. As agreed. I set my mug down and opened the folder. Inside were 3 pieces of paper. The top document was a wire transfer receipt. It was addressed to the regional bank that held my father's mortgage. The balance read 0. The account was paid in full. My breath hitched. The air suddenly felt too thin to breathe. I stared at the numbers, a heavy, suffocating knot in my chest suddenly loosening. The debt that had been killing my father, the crushing weight that kept him awake at night, coughing into a handkerchief, was simply gone. Erased by a single keystroke. I moved to the second page. It was a bank statement for a new offshore account registered entirely in my name. $2 million. The funds are completely clean. Damien explained, his voice low and even. Tied up in legitimate trusts. You can draw from it as you see fit. No one tracks it. Not even me. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. I wanted to cry, but the cynicism I had built up over the last 5 years held the tears back. This wasn't charity. This was a purchase. "And the third page?" I asked, looking at the final document. It was heavily redacted, dense with legal jargon. "A post-nuptial agreement," Damien said. "It guarantees that in 5 years, when we dissolve this marriage, you walk away with the money, your father's house remains untouched, and you sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding anything you see or hear while living under my roof. I looked up at him. And what exactly do you expect me to see or hear? Damien leaned forward, resting his forearms on the marble. The physical proximity was jarring. Up close, the danger radiating off him was almost tactile. I expect you to see a man conducting business, he said quietly. I expect you to ask no questions about where I go at night. I expect you to act the part of a devoted wife at public functions, dinners, and charity galas. You will smile. You will wear the jewelry I buy you. You will make the federal agents watching my every move believe that I am a domesticated, predictable family man. A human shield, I stated flatly. A partner, he corrected. I do not buy shields, Chloe. I make investments, and you are going to be a very lucrative investment. I traced the edge of the folder with my index finger. The terms were cold, brutal, honest. It was infinitely better than Preston's cowardly lies. Fine, I said, meeting his dark eyes without flinching. I play the wife, I smile, I don't ask questions. What are the rules for this house? There is only one rule. Damien said, his gaze dropping briefly to my lips before rising back to my eyes. You do not lie to me. Ever. You can hate me. You can yell at me. But you never lie to me. If you do, the contract is void and I cut you loose. I nodded slowly. Deal. 4 days later, the honeymoon phase officially began. And by honeymoon I mean I was thrust into a private dining room at a heavily guarded steakhouse to meet the men who essentially ran the city's underworld. These are associates, Damien had briefed me in the back of the SUV on the ride over. Not friends. They respect power and they exploit weakness. They know you were supposed to marry Preston. They will test you to see if you are a liability. Do not let them see you bleed. I had nodded, smoothing down the skirt of the black velvet dress Damien's stylist had dropped off that afternoon. I felt like I was wearing armor. Now I was sitting at a long mahogany table, nursing a glass of Barolo, surrounded by 6 men who looked like they swallowed glass for breakfast. They wore expensive suits that couldn't quite hide the thick, bullish slopes of their shoulders. The air was thick with cigar smoke, and the low, rumbling hum of men measuring each other's wealth and influence. I sat to Damien's immediate right. He was relaxed, leaning back in his leather chair, a glass of scotch resting casually on his thigh. But his eyes were tracking every movement in the room. Directly across from me sat Vincent. He was an older man, silver-haired, with a face mapped by deep crevices and cold, pale blue eyes. He ran the dock unions. He had been staring at me for 20 minutes, chewing on a toothpick like it owed him money. So Chloe... Vincent suddenly barked, his raspy voice cutting through the ambient chatter. The table went dead silent. Everyone turned to look at me. I got to admit it's a hell of a pivot. Friday you're picking out curtains with the tech boy, Saturday you're sitting at the big table with the boss. Give you whiplash, did it? A few of the men chuckled darkly. Beside me, Damien didn't move. He didn't intervene. This was the test he warned me about. He was watching me to see if I would crumble. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine. I set the crystal glass down on the white tablecloth, making sure my hand didn't shake. I looked Vincent dead in the eye. Not at all, Vincent. I said, my voice steady and cool. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the table. Preston was an internship. Damien is the career. The room remained absolutely silent for a heartbeat. Then the man at the end of the table let out a loud, barking laugh. Vincent's pale eyes narrowed. He removed the toothpick from his mouth. You've got a smart mouth on you. Preston wouldn't have liked that. Boy liked his women quiet and decorative. Preston liked a lot of things he couldn't handle, I replied, without missing a beat, leaning back in my chair. Which is why he's currently hiding in another time zone, and I'm sitting here. I prefer men who actually show up for their own lives. I glanced at Damien. He was taking a sip of his scotch, but the corners of his mouth were twitching. It was a fraction of a millimeter, but it was there. A ghost of a smile. "She's sharp, Damien," Vincent grunted, though his tone held a grudging sliver of respect. "I'll give you that. But sharp edges cut the person holding them if you ain't careful." Damien finally entered the conversation. He set his glass down, the clink of crystal against wood, sounding unnaturally loud. He didn't raise his voice, but the sudden drop in temperature in the room was palpable. "I know exactly how to handle sharp edges, Vincent," Damien said quietly. His dark eyes locked onto the older man, stripping away the casual dinner atmosphere and replacing it with raw dominance. "My wife's edges are precisely why she is sitting at my right hand, and I suggest you remember whose table you are sitting at before you question her again." Vincent swallowed hard, the tough guy facade cracking for a split second. He nodded quickly, averting his eyes. "No disrespect intended, boss. Just making conversation." "Make it about the shipping manifests, then," Damien ordered coldly. The conversation instantly shifted to tonnage customs officials and warehouse logistics. The tension bled out of the room, replaced by the mundane, brutal mechanics of organized crime. I let out a slow, silent breath through my nose. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but outwardly I kept my face an unreadable mask. I picked up my fork and cut into my steak. Under the table, out of sight of the capos and associates, I felt a heavy, warm hand cover my knee. I froze. Damien didn't look at me. He continued talking to the man on his left about a delay at the ports, his expression entirely stoic. But his thumb began to slowly, deliberately stroke the side of my knee through the velvet fabric of my dress. It wasn't a sexual gesture. It was a grounding one. An anchor in the middle of a storm. "You did well," the touch said. "You belong here." I didn't pull away. I let his hand stay there for the rest of the dinner, the heat of his palm seeping through my dress, entirely terrified by how much I was starting to like it. A month into our marriage, the true cost of my $2 million safety net became apparent. I was no longer a graphic designer with a penchant for oversized sweaters and late-night takeout. I was a Rossi. That meant I belonged to the public eye as much as I belonged to Damien. The annual Mayor's Charity Gala was the first major battleground. I stood in front of the vanity mirror in my bedroom, staring at the stranger looking back at me. A team of professionals had spent 3 hours painting, pinning, and polishing me. The dress was a midnight blue silk slip that clung to my ribs and pooled at my feet, held up by straps so thin they looked like spun glass. The bedroom door clicked open. I didn't jump. I had grown accustomed to Damien's silent arrivals. He walked into the room wearing a bespoke tuxedo that made him look less like a businessman and more like an apex predator attending a funeral. He carried a flat black velvet box in his left hand. "The car is waiting," Damien said, his voice a low gravel that seemed to vibrate in my chest. "I'm ready," I replied, turning around. Damien stopped. He looked at me. It wasn't the cold, calculating appraisal of the bridal suite. His eyes dragged down the length of the silk dress, taking in the exposed slope of my neck, the bare expanse of my shoulders, and the curve of my waist. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly heavy. He didn't say a word. He stepped forward, opening the velvet box. Inside lay a diamond necklace. The stones were massive, catching the dim bedroom light and throwing sharp, prismatic shards across the ceiling. "Turn around," he instructed softly. I turned, facing the mirror again. Damien stepped directly behind me. I could feel the heat radiating off his chest inches from my bare back. He lifted the necklace, his rough, calloused fingers brushing against my nape. A shiver violently ripped down my spine. You're cold. He noted his thumbs lingering on the clasp. I'm nervous, I corrected, watching our reflection in the mirror. We looked like a portrait of power and submission, but the reality was far more complicated. You said the feds would be there tonight. They will be, Damien confirmed, fastening the clasp. He didn't step back. He met my eyes in the mirror. Agent Miller has been trying to build a racketeering case against me for 3 years. He thinks my marriage to you is a sham. He will try to isolate you tonight. He will ask you questions designed to trip you up. What do I tell him? Nothing, Damien said quietly. He rested his hands lightly on my bare shoulders. The contrast between his heavy, dark presence and my fragile silk dress was jarring. You smile. You sip your champagne. You tell him your husband works too hard, and you wish he'd take you to the Amalfi Coast. You play the spoiled, oblivious wife. I don't know if I can pull that off. You can, Damien said, his grip tightening just a fraction. Because I will not let him near you for long. You are under my protection, Chloe. No one touches you. Not the feds, not my mother, not the press. I swallowed hard. Okay. The gala was a glittering nightmare of hypocrisy. Half the room despised Damien. The other half was terrified of him. Yet everyone wanted to shake his hand. We moved through the ballroom like a singular entity. His hand never left the small of my back. He guided me through crowds, deflecting, probing questions with terrifying politeness. It took 2 hours for Agent Miller to make his move. Damien had stepped away for exactly 1 minute to speak with a state senator. I was standing near an ice sculpture of a swan, nursing a club soda, when a tall, sandy-haired man in a cheap suit slid into my peripheral vision. Beautiful event, the man said, flashing a badge inside his breast pocket before I could walk away. Agent Miller, FBI. Mrs. Rossi, isn't it? I tightened my grip on my glass. Agent Miller. Yes, I'm Chloe. It's a fascinating story. You and Damien Miller, said his tone entirely too casual. He leaned against the table, invading my personal space. Preston leaves you at the altar, and an hour later you're marrying the big bad wolf. A cynic might think it was a business arrangement, a way to shield assets, or a way to keep a spouse from testifying in federal court. A cynic might think that I agreed, pasting on my best vacant smile. But a cynic wouldn't know Damien. He's incredibly romantic. Once you get past the brooding, of course. Miller chuckled, but his eyes were hard. Romantic. Right. Tell me, Chloe, when Damien comes home, late on a Tuesday, smelling like diesel fuel and bleach. Does he tell you where he's been? My stomach dropped. I kept my smile locked in place. My husband works in logistics, Agent Miller. He visits shipping yards. I don't ask him about cargo manifests. It bores me to tears. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I see... He's using you, Miller interrupted, dropping the polite facade. His voice was a harsh hiss. He is a ruthless, violent man who is using your clean record to launder his image. When the indictment comes down, and it will, he'll throw you to the wolves to save himself. We can offer you protection, Chloe. Tell us about the offshore accounts. The lady told you she was bored, Miller. The voice sliced through the air like a straight razor. Damien materialized beside me. He didn't look angry. He looked completely, perfectly calm. That was the most terrifying thing about him. Agent Miller instantly took a step back, the color draining from his face. Rossi, we were just chatting. No, you were harassing my wife, Damien said softly, wrapping a protective arm around my waist and pulling me flush against his side. If you want to discuss my business, you call my attorneys. If you ever approach my wife alone again, I won't send an attorney. Do we have an understanding? Miller opened his mouth, closed it, and offered a tight, humiliated nod. He turned and walked quickly away into the crowd. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, my knees going entirely weak. Damien caught my weight, effortlessly pressing his mouth to my temple. "Let's go home," he murmured against my skin. 3 days after the gala, the past walked right through the front door of our penthouse. I was sitting at the kitchen island, going over the architectural plans for the new community centre. Damien's holding company was ostensibly funding for tax purposes. I had a pencil behind my ear and a mug of lukewarm coffee in my hand. It was raining heavily outside, the sky a bruised, angry purple. The private elevator pinged. I didn't look up, assuming it was Damien's head of security dropping off the Daily Mail. "Chloe." The voice was nasal, panicked, and painfully familiar. I snapped my head up. Standing in the foyer, dripping wet and looking like a drowned rat in a soggy cashmere coat, was Preston. The pencil slipped from behind my ear and clattered onto the marble counter. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound in the penthouse was the heavy rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Preston took a step forward. He looked terrible. His usually perfectly coiffed hair was plastered to his forehead. He hadn't shaved in days, and the arrogant, easy confidence he usually wore was completely gone. He looked frantic. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. I didn't feel panic. I didn't feel heartbreak. I just felt a deep, profound irritation. "I had to see you," Preston stammered, walking into the living room, leaving a trail of muddy water on the expensive rug. I bribed the doorman. "Chloe, I made a mistake. A massive, horrible mistake." I stayed sitting. "You left me at the altar, Preston. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice." I panicked. He cried, running a hand through his wet hair. The pressure, the expectations, my mother was suffocating me. But I'm back now. I spent the last month in Cabo thinking about us. Thinking about you. "We can fix this." I stared at him. It was like looking at a stranger. For 2 years I had convinced myself this man was my future. I had contorted myself to fit his life, eating his terrible food, smiling at his pretentious friends, ignoring his constant need for validation. Now, seeing him standing here, I felt absolutely nothing. "Fix what?" I asked flatly. "I'm married, Preston." Preston scoffed, a desperate, ugly sound. "To Damien. Please, I know exactly what this is. He forced you into it, didn't he? To save the family face. He's a monster, Chloe. He's a thug in a suit. He manipulated you." "He didn't manipulate me," I said, finally standing up. I crossed my arms. "He offered me a deal. And unlike you, he actually showed up to the church." Preston's face twisted. "You're defending him. Do you have any idea what he actually does? The people he hurts? He doesn't care about you. You're just a pawn to keep the feds off his back. I love you, Chloe. Pack your things. We can leave right now. I have money. We can go to Europe." "You don't have money, Preston." A deep voice echoed from the hallway. "You have my money, and as of this morning, I cut off your trust fund." Preston froze. He turned slowly, terror wiping every trace of desperation from his face. Damien stepped out of the shadows of the hallway. He was wearing dark slacks and a black button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled up. He didn't rush. He walked into the kitchen with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who held all the cards. "Damien!" Preston choked out, taking an involuntary step backward. "You're tracking mud on my wife's rug," Damien noted coldly. Preston swallowed hard, looking wildly between Damien and me. "I just came to talk to her. To apologize." "You apologize from Mexico," Damien said, stopping a few feet away from his younger brother. The physical difference between them was staggering. Preston was soft-built by Pilates and green juice. Damien was built by violence and survival. You don't break into my home. She was mine first. Preston yelled a sudden, pathetic burst of bravado, breaking through his fear. Damien didn't yell back. He just tilted his head. She was never yours, Preston. You didn't have the spine to hold her. Now she is mine, and I do not share. Chloe, please, Preston begged, turning back to me. Tell him you want to leave. He can't keep you here, against your will. I looked at Preston. I looked at the man who had abandoned me to face the most humiliating moment of my life alone. Then I looked at Damien, the criminal, the syndicate boss. The man who had paid off my father's house, defended me to his toxic mother, protected me from the FBI, and made me feel more secure in 1 month than Preston had in 2 years. Preston, I said, quietly, holding his pathetic gaze. I am exactly where I want to be. Leave. Preston stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He looked broken. But I didn't care. You heard my wife, Damien said. His voice was a quiet, lethal threat. Get out of my city, Preston. If I see you near her again, I won't freeze your bank accounts. I will put you in the ground. Preston didn't say another word. He turned and practically ran for the elevator. The doors closed, leaving Damien and me alone in the quiet penthouse, the rain still drumming against the glass. Damien looked at me. The coldness in his eyes faded, replaced by something entirely different. Something heavy-hot and undeniable. You didn't have to defend me, he said softly. I wasn't defending you. I replied, my heart suddenly beating a frantic rhythm in my chest. I was stating a fact. Damien closed the distance between us. He didn't stop until he was standing right in front of me. He reached out his hand, cupping the side of my face, his thumb gently brushing across my cheekbone. A 5-year contract, Chloe. He murmured, his gaze dropping to my lips. I don't think that's going to be long enough. I didn't pull away when he said it. I didn't laugh it off as a joke. I just looked up at him, studying the harsh lines of his face, the jagged scar cutting through his eyebrow, and the absolute certainty in his dark, unblinking eyes. For my entire adult life, I had been trying to shrink myself. I had filed down my rough edges to fit into Preston's sanitized venture capital world. I had smiled politely, while his mother insulted my family's tax bracket in thinly veiled metaphors. I had traded my own self-respect for the illusion of financial safety. Damien didn't want me to shrink. He wanted me sharp. 5 years is a long time. I whispered, my voice betraying a slight tremor that I couldn't entirely suppress. A lot can happen. I know exactly what is going to happen, Chloe, Damien replied. His thumb traced my lower lip, sending a jolt of pure electricity straight down my spine. You are going to stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. You are going to realize that I am not a temporary fix. And you are going to let me be your husband. He didn't ask for permission this time. He leaned down and kissed me. It wasn't like the kiss at the altar. That had been a seal on a contract, a public performance designed for a bewildered audience. This kiss was private heavy and entirely consuming. It tasted like expensive scotch and raw, unchecked possession. I grabbed the lapels of his shirt, pulling him closer, my fingers digging into the hard muscle of his chest. The remaining walls I had built around my heart, the cynicism, the fear, the utter exhaustion of just trying to survive cracked and gave way completely. The transition from a business arrangement to a real marriage didn't happen overnight. It happened in quiet, unglamorous moments over the next 6 months. It happened on a Tuesday night when my father called, crying tears of sheer relief because his latest scans had come back completely clear. Damien had quietly flown in the best oncologist in the country and put him on a permanent staggering retainer, never mentioning a single word of it to me, until my dad dropped the news over the phone. It happened during late-night dinners at the kitchen island, where I would sketch out graphic designs for his legitimate businesses while he reviewed shipping manifests. We existed in a comfortable parallel silence. He didn't hide his dark, complicated world from me anymore, and I didn't flinch away from it. And it happened with the FBI. Agent Miller tried twice more to corner me, once at a grocery store and once outside my father's house. Both times, Damien's security detail physically intervened before Miller could even flash his badge. Eventually, the grand jury convened, reviewed the pristine, impenetrable financial records Damien had spent a decade building, and declined to indict. The case fell apart. The federal scrutiny slowly faded into the background noise of the city. We had won. On the night the news broke that the investigation was officially closed, I found Damien on the sprawling balcony of the penthouse. The city stretched out below us, a glittering grid of amber streetlights and moving cars. The night air was biting, but he stood out there in just a dress shirt, nursing a glass of bourbon and staring at the skyline he owned. I stepped out, shivering as the cold wind hit my bare arms. Damien turned immediately. He didn't say a word. He simply opened his arm. I stepped into his side, wrapping my arms around his waist as he pulled his heavy coat over my shoulders, trapping his body heat around me. "Miller is officially reassigned," Damien said, resting his chin on the top of my head. "He's being transferred to a desk job in Omaha. The board confirmed it an hour ago." "So," I murmured, staring out at the city below. "The shield worked." Damien went perfectly still. The comfortable silence stretched between us, suddenly thick and sudden. He pulled away slightly, just enough to look down at me. His expression was entirely unreadable. "Stay right here," he ordered quietly. He walked back inside the penthouse. I frowned, pulling his coat tighter around myself against the chill. 2 minutes later, he returned. He was holding a thick manila folder. I recognized it instantly. It was the exact folder he had slid across the kitchen island the morning after our wedding. He opened it and pulled out the heavily redacted 20-page document. The post-nuptial agreement. The 5-year exit strategy. Damien pulled a silver lighter from his pocket. With a flick of his thumb, a small bright flame erupted in the dark. He held the bottom corner of the contract to the fire. "Damien, what are you doing?" I gasped, stepping forward, as the thick parchment caught fire, the edges curling and turning black, nullifying the contract, he said calmly, watching the flames eat through the dense legal jargon. He held it until the fire licked dangerously close to his fingers, then dropped the burning mass into a heavy ceramic ashtray on the patio table. We watched it turn into a pile of grey, useless ash in the wind. He looked back up at me. "There is no exit strategy, Chloe. You aren't my shield. You aren't my alibi. And you certainly aren't a 5-year lease." My throat felt tight. "Then what am I?" Damien reached out his rough hands, firmly framing my face. The absolute, unyielding intensity in his dark eyes made my breath hitch in my chest. "You are my wife," Damien said, his voice a fierce, low vow that carried clearly over the city wind. "You are the only good thing in this God-forsaken city, and I am keeping you." I smiled a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes and chased away the very last lingering shadow of the humiliated girl who had cried in that bridal suite. I reached up, tracing the jagged scar on his brow. "Good," I whispered, "because I'm not going anywhere." And that is exactly how a humiliating nightmare at the altar turned into the greatest plot twist of a lifetime. Chloe chose the dark, dangerous devotion of a mafia boss over the cowardly promises of a tech billionaire. But did she make the right choice? Would you have taken Damien's deal, or would you have walked out of that cathedral alone? I want to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below. If you loved this deep, gritty romance story, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more dramatic storytelling. See you next time.